All right, folks, welcome to Investing for Beginners podcast. Today we have episode 375. Today, Andrew and I are going to actually continue a conversation we've been having off and on off air about FOMO and companies that we feel like we missed out on, and maybe some of the feelings or emotions that are tied to those, and maybe explore why we feel that about one particular company and maybe not another. And so maybe we could start off by talking about one of the ones I was just mentioning, which is NVIDIA. So I have absolutely zero FOMO about missing out on NVIDIA. And it's bizarre to me because I have the exact opposite. I have FOMO of missing out on Netflix a few years ago. I know the semiconductor industry way better than I know the SaaS industry, but yet I still beat myself up about not investing in Netflix all those years ago and not missing out on NVIDIA recently. So I guess maybe we could start there.
Yeah, that'll be fun. So why do you think you don't feel bad about missing NVIDIA?
I think it's because I already had, for me, I already had three companies at the time in my portfolio of semiconductor companies. I had TSMC, Texas Instruments, and Intel. And two of them I got from you, one of them I got from me. And Intel obviously was a dumpster fire and has been a dumpster fire, but I just didn't feel like I needed to add another key or another tool to the toolkit in that respect. And so I probably missed out on maybe the importance of GPUs and how they're going to impact AI. And in hindsight, it looks air quote obvious. But at the time, when it really started to become a thing, I didn't understand it. And I was like, I'm happy with having TSMC and happy with Texas Instruments. And I guess also part of it for me is, right or wrong, I feel like owning Taiwan Semiconductor is a play on owning NVIDIA because they're so integrated and important to each other. And so I feel because I have Taiwan Semi, I don't need NVIDIA.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel similarly about my TSMC position as well.
Mm.
Because that for sure, if NVIDIA makes money, so does TSMC.
Mm-hmm.
I guess what's interesting to me is you saying that like you have exposure to semiconductors already.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I have similar feelings where if I see big things happening in the world, I want to make sure I have exposure to it as an investor. And maybe that's a bias. Maybe that's because you could argue from a mathematical standpoint, you and I both missing NVIDIA was a disaster.
Mm.
And it's funny how our emotions tell us that, you know what, it's okay.
Mm-hmm. Right.
No worries. But then there are other companies, like for me, we were talking about how I feel a lot of FOMO about not putting enough in Costco. But then I didn't put enough in Watsco either. And I feel no FOMO about that. So it's very interesting to me that as investors who are out there in the wild, we have these things that are very not logical, yet how much are these emotions filtering into how we ultimately make our decisions and how we view companies and mental models and all of those things? Not saying we're going to uncover it all, but I think it's just interesting to think about. Do you agree with the need to, maybe not needs too strong, but this feeling of I have to have exposure to a certain number of things? Like, do you resonate with that at all?
I think I am evolving into having maybe some sort of that. And some of that stems from my experience going down the payments rabbit hole. And I really became not really a generalist investor, but more a focused investor on one sector. And I'm happy with the companies I bought for the most part, and they've done well for me. But the flip side of that is it really hampered my portfolio and my returns for a while because I was so focused on one particular sector. And that's really where all my energy, brain wise and research wise, went. Was that's my happy place. And so that's where I'm comfortable and that's where I'm going to look all the time. And it wasn't until you and I started talking about other industries and really started uncovering all these great companies that I'm like, hey, I'm missing out some things here. And I need to be more diversified, and I need to diversify away from my reliance on the payments industry. I still, to this day, even though I don't own some of these companies, I still get excited about them, or I still get, ooh, I need to learn more about Wise, or our friend Brett Schaefer was talking about Remitly. I'm like, ooh, I could look at that. But in the back of my head, I'm like, I can't do that because I already have all these exposure. If I want to keep my portfolio to the 2025 number that I want to do, then I can't have 17 of them be payments companies. So I have to branch out. And by following your picks, that's helped me do that a lot, because that's not an area that you focus on a lot. And so that helps me branch away from that. But it's still my happy place. And if I see a collection of companies that I could read about, my eyes are always going to gravitate towards the payments ones. And that's just where I'm going to go, because that's my happy place. But I know that I need to branch away from those. So that's how I try to think about it.
Do you feel like it's a good thing you learned that lesson earlier rather than, let's say, in 20, 25 years when you have a bigger portfolio?
Yes. most definitely. I know that it's a dichotomy, right? I know that people that work for investment banks, for example, they may have a particular focus that they spend all their time researching, writing reports, recommending stocks or companies to investors or hedge funds and all that stuff. But I don't know how those people invest outside of that. Are they just focused on grocery stores, for example? Or our friend Todd Wedding, what was I think it was waste management was his sector. That's super exciting. And was that all he's investing in? I doubt it. And so I think it's been proven that being more of a generalist is probably a better way to invest. And I'm glad that I learned that earlier than later, for sure.
When I look at somebody like Ben Thompson, I feel like
Mhm.
he's a super specialist. He knows a lot about platforms and moats and the big tech.
Yes.
One of the things I like about him is he says out loud, I don't invest in any of these individually. And
Hmm.
so he doesn't have those biases that you would feel like I would feel if I was writing about Microsoft or Apple or Alphabet once a week.
Daily.
It would be very hard for me to see when like actual cracks are happening, or just to have unbiased analysis on it, just because you just happen to cheer for the things you own.
Hmm.
I think most of us do. At least I do. I
Yeah.
cheer for what I own.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think that's a natural place to be, is to cheer for what you've bought, because you've not only spent the time trying to learn about the business, some of your ego is tied up into it too, right? Because we put our money on the line, we're betting that we're right and somebody else is wrong. And when it doesn't prove to be the case, then our ego takes a hit too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we don't want to put a measuring stick on my ego, so let's just move past that. But I find it interesting that you mentioned the industry thing, because I came across something this morning. I was just, surfing in the sheets, in the spreadsheets this morning with macros and everything. It was interesting to look at the industries as they're defined by QuickFS.
Mm.
He lets you pull out all the data, and I pulled out probably, I don't know, 5, 6, 7,000 stocks and looked at, call it like 20 years of revenue history. So take a 5-year period. I'm going to make this really simple. So 2023, and then compare it to 2017. And then look at the industry growth for each industry, the average revenue growth. And then you would say, what's the correlation? If an industry had high growth in 2017, how high was its growth in 2013? And so what's the correlation for every industry that QuickFS has defined? The correlation was 0.19, which is considered a weak correlation.
Mm.
So I asked AI, what are some examples of weak correlation? Because I realize that's like a very mathematical term. It is like the relationship between the number of butterflies in a region and the average rainfall that year, Or I like this one, the correlation between the height of a tree and the number of birds nesting in it. So that one I can visualize pretty nicely, right? Yeah, a taller tree probably has more birds nesting in it, but I wouldn't use a 6-foot tree versus an 8-foot tree to measure how many birds I think are going to be in each tree.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the revenue growth was. I'm not talking about specific companies. I'm talking about just the industries and the average of the stocks in those industries. I thought that was really fascinating.
It is. It is fascinating. And how were you searching through the data for a reason?
Yeah, I can't remember right now why I was. It's usually how it goes. Yeah, I'm looking at an outlier. That's for January's pick.
Right.
I can't go any further. It's confidential, of course.
Understood.
But
Understood.
I want to go back to the whole FOMO thing, right? Do you think there are certain industries that either you or maybe me or investors in general will generally have more FOMO over than others? Is it industries that we hear about in the media all the time, or industries we perceive as, for example, I don't have any investments in utilities.
Mm.
And I have no FOMO about that. Like, even if a utility, and they probably will be one, especially one maybe with renewable energy or something, if one of them just in the next 10 years takes off, crosses over that blazes that path, I probably will feel zero FOMO.
Mm.
And I don't know why that's the case, where if it happened in cloud computing or home building, I guess, I would feel a lot more FOMO.
Yeah. I think it's directly correlated to probably two things, at least in my circumstance. I can't speak for anybody else. Number one, how well I know a particular industry. And number two, probably how much you're exposed to other industries via social media, news, things you read. As for example, on social media, Hims, a company I know almost nothing about, is very popular, and it's very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's very charged. You're either bullish or you're bearish, and there's not a whole lot in between. And so there's a lot of powerful emotions on each side. I won't have much. That to me doesn't give me any FOMO at all, because it's not really something I'm interested in at all. But I think if you're exposed constantly to the latest, greatest names in, for example, AI or cloud computing, and those two in particular are the sexy sectors, industries right now, I think people probably would have more FOMO about missing out on those, because I think those in particular are generally regarded as the next big thing. And so if you aren't able to take advantage of that in one way, shape, or form, then I think it would be natural to feel like you missed out on that. To your point, I know almost nothing about cars. And other than I got to put gas in it and I have somebody else has to change my oil, that's about the extent of my knowledge of vehicles goes. And so I feel zero FOMO about missing out on Tesla. Just doesn't, I don't care. But people that are maybe more into cars or more into other parts of what Tesla does are probably have serious FOMO going on. And so to me, it probably relates to whatever the new shiny thing is and how well a particular industry or sector.
That's so brilliant. And if I think about the things I feel most FOMO about, is like Apple,
Mm-hmm.
huge one for me. Like,
Yep.
we literally joke my daughter's first word was Apple. Like, there's so much video evidence of this, by the way. It tortures me. And she would say it over, she'd call me Apple. She would point at the window, call it Apple. And I thought she was just wanting an apple. It turns out she was trying to tell me, dummy,
Buy Apple,
buy
dummy.
some Apple stock, right?
Buy me Apple, dummy.
So Apple, I feel like, because everybody has an iPhone or knows an iPhone. Amazon, like, I want to find the next Amazon, right?
We all do.
Yeah, I feel like you hit the nail on the head when you said we don't want to miss the next big thing. And those were like really big things, like after Amazon, before Amazon, buying stuff online wasn't really mainstream. Before Apple, having a smartphone wasn't a main thing. those big things, we feel like we need something like that to build wealth
Mm-hmm.
or to make it rich or whatever it is, or to be a good stock picker.
Right.
But that I don't think that's true, but I think it's what our emotions tell us. Do you
Mm-hmm.
agree? Disagree?
Oh yeah, no, I 100% agree, because to your point, if some next big thing hit the housing market and you missed it, you would beat yourself up about that from now until the end of time, because that's an industry really well and you're comfortable in, you like investing in that space. And if you missed out on something like that, I would feel the same about payments. If the next big thing hit payments and I missed out on it, I would beat myself up from now until the end of time. But if the next big thing came down in waste management, zero FOMO. Just don't. It's not to say that those are bad places to invest. It's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, because I don't really know that industry, meh. But I think the next big thing is always really high on most investors' list to not miss out on, Apple, to not miss out on Amazon, or to miss out on Google, or to miss out on, blanking on other companies, but Meta, all these different companies that have had these huge successes and have really changed the way humans behave, the way we communicate with each other, and the way we do business. And if you miss out on those, you're going to feel some remorse, because what was I thinking? And I think that's probably I'm speculating. I think some of the enthusiasm or hysteria around Bitcoin comes from, is people feel like that's going to be the next big thing. And so they don't want to miss out. And that's why people, when it goes crazy, that's why people pile into it.
Yeah. The meta thing, I find myself sometimes, like, that little thing creeps in the back of my head,
Me too.
because they have the whole new glasses,
Yeah.
which could be the next iPhone. So
Right.
even though my gut and my brain tell me you don't want to own this, like, it doesn't fit you personally, it's not your style, I still, you get that nagging thing, because it's, what if it is the next iPhone?
Right.
That one's hard.
It is. It's very hard. It's very hard. I think I might have mentioned this. I watched the Acquired episode that he did with those guys a few months back. And I remember thinking to myself, I've always stayed away from Meta/Facebook because I wasn't totally sure about him, like Mark Zuckerberg as the leader. And after I watched that, I was like, I might have been wrong about him. And that led me to, I didn't do anything about it, and I still haven't done anything about it, but it certainly led me to thinking more about, to your point, is this Ray-Ban thing going to be the next iPhone? Was that what, because you have to think at some point, most technology is disrupted in some way, shape, or form at some point. And what is going to be the thing that could disrupt an iPhone?
Yeah.
And could it be glasses? Could it be what Apple was creating with their Vision Pro? Could it be what Meta is doing with, I don't know. And so that gives me, maybe not full on FOMO, but it certainly gives me pause to think about it.
What are some ways that you can think of? One that just pops to my head is, like, trusting the process, but, like, being okay with who you are or how you're choosing to do things. That's one way I think you can combat FOMO. Are there other things that pop in your head, things you've found to be more helpful? Anything that can help us out here?
Yeah. I think one of the things I always try to think back on is, whenever I start to feel that, is I remember I look, I'm a history nerd, so I look to history to help fill in some gaps sometimes when I'm trying to think about things. And I come back to Charlie and Warren both talking about how they missed Google all those years ago. And they acknowledge it, but I don't think they have much regret about it. And they didn't try to overreact and buy it at any other point from the time that hey, this is a great opportunity and I missed it. They just don't, other than talking about the fact that they acknowledge it was a great investment or potential investment and that they didn't take advantage of it, they don't seem to really beat themselves up about it and never really try to overcompensate for that. And that always reminds me that A, it's okay to miss, and B, you don't have to swing at every pitch. And so it's okay to miss. And B, you can still have fabulous returns without owning the next greatest thing.
Yeah, I feel like you hit it right there. You can't swing at every pitch.
Mm-mm.
It's not humanly possible.
Mm-mm.
There's
No.
too many going by at any time.
Yeah. You have choices, right? The way I think about it is we have choices when we invest. And you can be the kind of investor that goes out and buys 600 companies. You're talking about collecting Pokemon cards. You can be one of those people, right? Where you can collect 600 companies. But if you do that, you got to remember that each one of them is going to be 0.02% of your portfolio. And so even if you do get lucky and one of those 600 is the next best thing, you own such little of it that it's going to have almost negligible impact on your portfolio. And so you got to balance your choices. And I think to stay sane in the market, at least for me, I need to try to remember that I got to play my game and I got to remember to try to do what I am comfortable with. I think I'm pretty conservative and I'm also frugal, as my wife says, cheap. And so that helps me, that helps control some of the impulse buys is because I have that natural bias of being cheap.
Yeah.
And so because of that, then that helps me not go crazy wanting to buy things.
Yeah, I like that a lot. So if you're Juan Soto, keep doing the Soto shuffle and don't try to become like a Mike Trout.
You don't try to become Mike Trout, just like you wouldn't want to try to become Mookie Betts.
Right.
Like completely different game than Juan Soto plays, right? Just very athletic, defense, running the bases, obviously comparable, very probably a better hitter than Mookie, arguably, but the rest of his game, that's not Juan's game. And if he tries to play like that, he wouldn't be worth $50 million a year.
Right. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. So how do you think about trying to avoid FOMO or trying to, avoid beating yourself up about not putting enough money into Costco or Watsco?
Yeah. Now you're digging the knife in a little bit.
Right.
That's hard. I'm still trying to figure that out as I go along. The Costco one is definitely hard, but I'm hoping that there's a good lesson inside missing Costco. So I haven't said it on the air, but I've probably said it in 15 other episodes. I've been going to Costco since I was 14, 13, 12. Like I've known about Costco for a long time. And so when my spreadsheet numbers finally made sense, instead of take a big swing, I took a little bunt single on it. And I regret that because not so much because I missed out on the money, but because I feel like I know Costco and I've seen the magic of it and I've seen why people renew their memberships. I know all about that intimately. And by the time I was ready to take another swing, it was already too late. To your point, like the pitch had already gone, the fat pitch had left.
Right.
So I think trying to learn from that, I think there's a good lesson in there. Where if you're somebody like me who's maybe a little bit too risk averse, that if a fat pitch is coming, I just got to swing, even though it might be uncomfortable. Yeah, I might fall on my face, but I should swing if I feel like I know something. But then the flip side of that is there's a lot of companies, to your point, like Tesla, where I don't feel any FOMO about that because I feel like it's lucky. If you got that, great for you. But I don't know how you replicate finding another Tesla. But there's other ones where it's more gray area. I feel bad about that. Or I should have bought that dip or something. So I don't have the answer for that either. But something that I've been thinking about lately is just do the work and then make the decision. And then over a long enough time period, I'm going to be fine. And I'm going to get to where I'm trying to get to. But doing the work is really all I can control.
Mhm.
And doing it smartly, because that's the thing too, right? I don't want to just do the work and mindlessly do it. I want to work smart, but being intentional and then having that game plan and then actually doing it.
Mhm.
I think that might help, and I'm hoping that it will.
I think it will. I think having a plan, understanding the game you're trying to play, and trying to stick to those things. Being an investor does require a certain level of discipline, and I think having those parts in place can really, along with having some discipline, I think all those things can help avoid or at least mitigate some of the FOMO. And I liken it a little bit to sports in that we all like to sit around and fantasize about the top 7 or 8 baseball players all playing on the same team. And we see it on a daily, every year. For those of you who aren't big baseball fans, every year they have a free agent class, and everybody spends a lot of time and effort and energy trying to determine who's going to go where and how much they're going to pay for this, that, and the other thing. And there's always proclamations of, if you will, of who won the winter. And last year it was the Dodgers because they got the best player on the planet and Shohei Ohtani. Spent a lot of money for him, and it worked out well for them because they ended up winning the prize and winning the World Series. This year, because the New York Mets signed Juan Soto, everybody's proclaiming them so far as the winner of the winter. But time will tell whether that's really going to play out well for them. A few years ago, the San Diego Padres spent a lot of money, brought in lots of great players, including Juan Soto, and it fell flat. They didn't do great. I don't think they even made the playoffs. And so it was not a great season. And so sometimes maybe it's not the greatest, strongest analogy, but sometimes having a portfolio full of all the greatest stars is not always going to be the best portfolio for you. And I think that's something to always try to keep in mind.
Yeah, I love that one. Shout out to John in
Yeah.
the community. He's like, baseball metaphors. Bring 'em
More
on.
baseball metaphors.
I'm down. I'm down.
Yeah. Yeah. I can always liken everything to baseball, right?
Now I'm just sad because it's not even close to April.
No,
Like we're not even close. Like we're still. Have we even hit winter solstice as we record
nope.
this?
That's
No.
not a couple more weeks, I think. So
I'll go cry in my sunflower seeds after this.
Yeah, talk about cyclical industry, sunflower seeds. That would be very cyclical.
Hope you guys enjoyed this little back and forth. It was fun for me. Hopefully it was fun to listen to as well. And maybe you learned a thing or two. So take action today, connect, learn, and grow with Value Spotlight. Peace.